Okay, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining the webinar, Teaching Tough Topics Through Children's Literature. We are so glad that you're here with us today. And I wanted to note for those who have to leave early or cannot attend live, the webinar is being recorded and the link will be available to view the video within a week after this recording. And also stay tuned for an email that will include the link and also toolkits, which are PDFs that will contain the books that we mentioned in the webinar, in addition to resources from myself at Lee & Low and from Jinnie at ADL. So there will also be a certificate for this webinar if needed after the recording. So now I want to introduce my co-panelist, Jinnie Spiegler.
Hi everyone, I'm Jinnie Spiegler. I'm the Director of Curriculum at the Anti Defamation League in the Education Department. We work with 25 regional offices across the country with education staff who bring our anti-bias and our bullying prevention programs to schools in those areas. And in addition to writing curriculum, both print curriculum and online curriculum, I oversee Books Matter, which is very relevant to this conversation. It's our online bibliography of about 800 books on bias, bullying, diversity, and social justice. And each month we feature a book of the month. And for those books, we have a book discussion guide for teachers and a book discussion guide for parents. So many of the books highlighted in this webinar have those resources with them. I've also worked for other nonprofits such as Morningside Center for Teaching Social Responsibility and Bank Street College of Education. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you so much, Jinnie. And I am Katie Potter. I am the literacy specialist at Lee & Low Books. I develop and write the teacher's guides that we offer that are complimentary for our books here. And I also work with professors and nonprofit organizations on how to incorporate our diverse and multicultural literature into curriculum and respective syllabi. And I also have worked as an educational researcher for a grant from the U.S. Department of Education that was designed to engender math and literacy skills. And I also was a teacher in 1st and 5th grade classrooms and a literacy instructor in New York City schools. I have my master's degree from Bank Street College of Education in childhood general education grades 1 through 6 and literacy. So during this webinar, we are going to talk about why it's important to discuss tough topics with children through relevant literature. Jinnie is going to talk about developmental ages and stages, meaning at what points children are ready to engage with such content. And then we have 3 guiding questions when that will sort of present, it's a frame of context for how we're presenting the books. The first question is, what is bias and bullying? The second question is, what is happening in the news? And the third question is, how can we help young people take action? Then Jinnie will conclude with some tips that will help guide you through these conversations with children. And then finally, we'll answer a few questions at the end that emerge from our conversation. So our intention for the webinar is to help teachers find books and activities that help to establish classroom community and guidelines. And as we all know, children's books have a wonderful way of presenting content that children can relate to. And it also takes the onus off of us as teachers, librarians, caregivers, to convey this content through books. And the books that we're going to talk about foster critical thinking, empathy, and other social and emotional learning qualities that are essential to children's development. And so the beginning of the school year is an incredibly crucial time to establish classroom community and culture. While we're getting to know our students in whatever context, you know, in their interests and experiences, it's great to talk about these issues instead of assuming children know certain things. And so we are going to present some read alouds that we think are great ways to have those conversations emerge. Again, this is a reminder that this webinar is being recorded, so you can watch the entire presentation after this viewing, and there will be a toolkit at the end with a list of books and additional resources for talking about tough topics through children's literature. So we have a quick polling question before we begin. So we want to get to know what you do. So I'm going to launch a poll, and you can let us know your role and interest in attending this webinar. Okay, great. Thank you so much for answering the questions. So as you can see here, we have librarians, teachers, families, professors, all joining us today. So thank you so much for sharing. And it's great to know the makeup of our participants as we go through. So thank you so much. And Jinnie is now going to take us through the developmental ages and stages.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to give you a brief overview of some research. Researchers have learned important information about how young people develop racial and cultural identity and attitudes, and information about bias. I'm going to go over some of these and highlight what children are capable and ready to engage in regarding identity, race, gender, ethnicity, bias issues. And these concepts can be used as a framework for having conversations with children and what books to read and what topics to bring to them. So 2-year-olds are becoming increasingly aware of the physical aspects of identity. So usually gender is something that's noticed first, followed by a curiosity about, they might not think about it as race, but skin color, hair color, eye shape, and other aspects of physical characteristics. Also, an awareness of disabilities tends to come a little later than awareness of gender and race. And again, these are generalities, so every child is different. But visible, when physical disabilities are visible, they might be noticed sooner. Children also between the ages of 2 and 3 may begin to be aware of the cultural aspects of gender. They may notice in the media or in real life, girls play more with dolls and boys play more often with trucks. Now, is that a stereotype? Yes, it definitely is. Is that something that young people, children will see in their lives? Most likely. And that's why it's important to talk about stereotypes and how that doesn't mean that that is something that comes naturally and that girls can only find interest in those kinds of activities and boys the same. Also, children at this age may take their first steps towards the appreciation of people who are physically and culturally different than themselves. And when they have positive interactions that are part of home and school and after school, that makes them feel positive about differences. 3 and 4-year-olds begin to expand their observations of differences and they seek more explanation for those differences. They may be aware of their own and other physical characteristics. Constructing their own identity is an important part of their development. They want to know how they got their skin, hair, and eye color. They may question why a racial group has a color name, like white people are not white and black people are not black. So they see a disconnect there and they may have questions about that. Preschoolers are also curious about variations within their family and extended family. They may be in the same family, but they may have different skin colors or different hair texture or hair color. So, but they're part of the same group, so they may be curious about that too. And they also wonder if things like hair, skin, race, etc., are constant or will that change? As they move into kindergarten, 5-year-olds begin to build their own group ethnic identity as well as their own individual identity. They begin to understand and have questions about the scientific explanations for differences in some of the racial, physical differences. They are also beginning to understand the concept of family traditions and family history and how that may relate to their culture, race, or ethnicity. Then when we move into the 6 to 8 year old group, first, second, third grade-ish, 6 to 8 year olds continue to recognize other group members and begin to realize that their own race and ethnicity is not changeable. They begin to be aware of some of the history and attitudes about certain cultural groups, and also may begin to understand that those could be influenced by the media, which may begin to foster personal prejudices. They can both begin to develop prejudices and also understand what prejudice is in others. Children at this age are highly influenced by the way they see people interact and resolve conflict. So if they see positive interactions between people from different groups, this has a positive impact on them. And they may begin to show signs of having pride in their own cultural identities and understand the experience of others. And as children are moving into upper elementary and even beginning middle school, so 9 to 12 year olds are gaining a deeper understanding of the geographic and historical aspects of culture. Where did I come from? What country? What place? What's my history? Although many 9 to 12 year olds may still be concrete thinkers primarily, and mainly thinking about their own experiences, they could move into more abstract thinking at this age. They can begin to gain an awareness of different perspectives. So something could happen either in the current world or a historical event, and they can begin to reflect on how people may have different perspectives about that event. They may understand personal and family struggles against bias, and they're often interested in discussing culture, race, differences. And also children at this age are becoming increasingly aware of through the media and the larger community of the advantages and disadvantages of some groups over others. So they begin to see bias, discrimination, racism, sexism, all those kind of things. They can really have conversations with them about that. And also most children in this age group can understand racial and other cultural stereotypes at this age. So it's important to know that this is a framework for what children are capable of. A lot of it depends on the extent to which adults in their lives, parents, family members, teachers, librarians, are having these conversations with them. So we want you to know what they are capable of, and that's why we really think it's important to use children's literature as an opening to having some of those conversations.
Thanks, Jinnie. That's really helpful as we transition into our next question, so that everyone listening, as Jinnie said, has the framework in mind as to what type of content children can engage with at what age. So I'm going to talk about the first question: what is bias and bullying? And I created these definitions with the help of ADL and other professional organizations so that I could provide the most accurate terms as possible to help inform librarians and educators and families who are listening in. So bias is defined as an inclination or preference either for or against an individual group that interferes with impartial judgment. Bullying, on the other hand, is defined as repeated actions or threats of action directed toward a person by one or more people who have more power or status than their target in order to cause fear, distress, or harm. And bullying can be verbal, physical, psychological, or technological, or a combination of all of those, or some of them. So I also wanted to note that when you speak with children about bullying in particular, it's important to let them know not to label kids when talking about these issues in whatever context if you're in a library, or if you're at home, or if you're in the classroom. So stopbullying.gov is a great resource and has wonderful ideas on how to help aid in these conversations. So instead of calling children bullies and victims. You call the children who are involved the child who bullied and the child who was bullied. And you take away labeling children, as I had given in the first example. So when you label, it can possibly send a message to children that this behavior can't change or that the rules are permanent and fixed. So it's really, the language is really crucial when you have these conversations, and preparing yourself to engage in these, when you have these discussions, is of the utmost importance. And now Jinnie is going to talk us through her text selections for this question.
So these are it was really hard to choose. There's so many wonderful books on all of these topics. These were 3 that I selected because they address different things. Each Kindness, many of you may be familiar with it. It's a wonderful book by Jacqueline Woodson about bullying. One thing I really like about it is that it focuses on the child who's engaging in the bullying and less on the target. A lot of books about bullying focus on the target. So what happens in the book is there's a new girl at school named Maya. She arrives at school, and Chloe, the girl in the picture, and her friends tease and bully Maya. I think it's because of her socioeconomic status. They tease her around not having new clothes and things like that. And she basically ends up playing alone. And then one day she leaves school and no one knows why. And as a result of that, and a result of the teacher observing what's happening, the teacher engages in a discussion about kindness. And Chloe does some self-reflection about her own behavior and about her kindness, her ability to be kind. And so it's a beautiful book that focuses, really on the person doing the bullying and what she is left with. This is a book for ages 4 to 8. I think it could go a little older too. It doesn't end in a nice, neat bow, as many books do. It is a book that is left with her thinking about what she could do differently. The next book is Grace for President, also for 4 to 8-year-olds. This is a book about a girl named Grace who's on the cover, and she learns very early on that there has never been a woman president. She sees all the pictures of the presidents on her classroom wall, and she says, "Where are the girls?" She decides she's going to be the first woman president, and she starts her career as a candidate in her school's mock election. And so the whole book is a lot about that and some of the ideas that she has about who's going to win based on she's running against a boy and who she thinks she thinks it's going to break down along gender lines. And you'll see what happens at the end, but it has an interesting ending. And so the last book is called Stella Brings the Family. And this is about a very common thing that we've all heard a lot about. It's about a girl who has 2 dads. The teacher announces early in May that they're going to have a Mother's Day celebration and all the kids can bring their mothers to school. And Stella really wonders what to do. She's concerned about it. And she talks with other kids. They start asking her questions like, well, if you don't have a mom, who takes care of you when you're sick, or who, tucks you in at night? And she says, my dad's, of course. So she's left with that dilemma, and she figures out a unique solution that helps her feel part of the class. This is also a picture book for ages 4 to 8, and a great way to introduce this kind of topic, which does come up, inclusive families, but also thinking about those kinds of holidays and being sensitive to many different kinds of families.
Thanks so much, Jinnie. Those are all such wonderful books. So I'm going to take us all through some Lee and Low titles that address this question. So the first one that I'm going to talk about is called Friends from the Other Side, Amigos del Otro Lado. This is a bilingual book, and it's about Prietita. She's a young Mexican-American girl, and she defends Joaquin from the neighborhood kids who taunt him with shouts of mojado or wetback, and she wonders about how she can help protect Joaquin and his mother from the Border Patrol as they unexpectedly come through their neighborhood, and how she can act as an ally both against the children who bully him at school and also from this unexpected visitor. And the author and illustrator Gloria and Ansalua and Consuelo Mendez, they both grew up in South Texas. So they have not only captured the hardship of daily life on the border, but also the beauty of the landscape and the dignity and generosity of the spirit that Mexican American and Mexican immigrants share. And it's a really wonderful book. And I would say this book is great for children in grades, I would say 2 through 5. And it's a really timely book right now. Chess Rumble by G. Neri. This book is about Marcus, and in Marcus's world, battles are fought every day at home, on the street, and in school. He's angered by his sister's death and his father's absence, and he's pushed to the brink when he has a classmate who bullies him, and Marcus tends to fight back physically. And so he almost gets kicked out of school and home, but he meets a chess master who challenges him to fight his battles elsewhere, and elsewhere meaning the chessboard. And Marcus learns some really great lessons on how to regain control of his life. And this book is told in verse, and it's great for children in grades 3 through 6. Lastly, Sparkle Boy is one of my favorites, and it's about Casey, who you see on the cover. Casey loves to play with blocks, puzzles, and his dump truck, but he also loves things that shimmer, glitter, and sparkle. So Casey has an older sister who isn't so happy with this. She thinks it's weird, and she kind of gets frustrated by Casey. She thinks that shimmery, glittery, sparkly things are for girls, but that's what she initially thinks. Because when Casey and Jesse head to the library for story time, Casey proudly wears his shimmery skirt, as you see in the illustration. And Jesse thinks, she's a little nervous and, thinks about, well, what will happen when the other kids see him? And so I don't want to give you the ending because about what happens when Casey gets bullied. But it's a really refreshing story that speaks to us all about acceptance, respect, and really importantly, the freedom to be yourself. And so I have an excerpt here, an excerpt spread from Sparkle Boy, and I'll just read it to you. Mama went upstairs and came back with a skirt that was now too small for Jesse. Here, buddy, she said to Casey, try this on. Ooh, shimmery, shimmery, Casey said as he twirled around and his shimmery skirts twirled out all around him. Casey twirled and twirled until he got dizzy and plopped down on his bottom. Casey laughed. Jesse frowned. And you can see Jesse standing off to the left, not looking so pleased. So this book, I think, addresses both bias and bullying in a really great way, especially for young children, I would say in grades pre-K to 2, to really talk about gender norms and gender stereotypes. So the first activity suggestion is have a class discussion about what children, or discussion in the library or in the classroom or at home about what bullying means. And this is especially great in the beginning of the year when you get kids fresh and you have the opportunity to really start kind of with a blank slate and talking about these terms and have children generate examples of what they think bullying is and what bullying is not. And then you can have this in your library or classroom to refer to, and it gets kids thinking in really dynamic and critical ways. StopBullying.gov I thought was a really great resource that I had mentioned earlier for more information and ideas on how to talk about bullying with kids. So the second item is talking about gender bias and stereotypes with Sparkle Boy. It's really a great book that brings up a lot of issues relating to that, to bias. And I found that Teaching Tolerances, What Are Gender Stereotypes, has a really great lesson plan that kind of outlines what exactly you should do when you're beginning to talk about gender stereotypes. So first, similar to the activity that I had mentioned about bullying, you have children to just start talking about characteristics that they think ascribe to either to boys or girls, and you can create actual boxes on whatever paper, enlarged paper that you have, or whiteboard, whatever is of use to you, and how they're supposed to act, that those words will be placed inside of a box, and what actions they might consider out of the box. Or, these are just ways that you can start talking about gender stereotypes. And it's really powerful when when these issues come to the surface, and it brings children's level of awareness up, and how these gender biases and stereotypes are harmful and detrimental to identity. And these are just some activities that you can use when you're using Sparkle Boy in whatever context. And now Jinnie is going to talk to us about our second question: what is happening in the news?
Thanks. So what's happening in the news? This can take two forms. One is just thinking about, children thinking about what's on the news, what's in the news, seeing their parents watching the news. Many people nowadays are glued to their phones or TVs watching the news all the time, and we're going to actually look at a book that addresses that. It's also a way, when we're talking with children about the news, we need to be mindful that even if they're not talking with us about it, even if we're not seeing that, they are listening and they are hearing. And we need to know that that's happening, and that they're digesting it, and they might not necessarily be getting their questions answered, and they might be making assumptions, but they are definitely digesting it. So there are a lot of issues that are relevant in the news. There's a wide range of issues that we can raise with children, or if they raise them, we can use some of these books as jumping off points. And the books address these issues. You saw with Grace for President, women and politics, and it addresses it in a very sensitive, age-appropriate way, but we can have the conversation either in the midst of reading the book or afterward, or a little bit before. So there are lots of books, beautiful, wonderful books on topics like immigration, family separations, racism, refugees, identity issues, LGBTQ rights, genocide, elements of genocide, bullying, bias of all kinds. So it's important to know that those books exist, and we can use those to really have those kind of conversations. And at the same time, we don't want children to feel powerless or despairing or hopeless when they hear some of the hard issues in the news and current events. When we need to give them both the language and the inspiration for taking their own child-sized actions about something that they can do. We're going to talk about that a little bit more later, but it's in many of these books, there might be a child-sized action at the end of the book about something they can do, but that's something that you can discuss while you're reading the book with them. So now we're going to look at some of our suggestions. So I'm going to dig a little bit more into the breaking news later, but the breaking news it's a very new book. It's very relevant. It's for 4 to 8-year-olds. It's a young girl, as you can see in the picture. She watches as her normally attentive parents and neighbors are suddenly exhausted, distracted, and always watching the news and always looking stressed. At school, the teacher says, look for the helpers. That's something you may remember from Mr. Rogers. Look for the helpers, what I was just talking about before, people who help, people take action. And she says to make things better in big and small ways. And the girl in this book she takes that to heart, and she wants to help in a very big way. And what she finds is that sometimes helping in a small way adds up and makes a difference. So that's a very good book about just news. It's not about a particular topic, but it's about kids noticing their people around them are really thinking a lot about the news. The next book, Mama's Nightingale, is for 6 to 10-year-olds. This book is about a girl named Saya. Her family is Haitian, and her mother is sent to an immigration detention center. So obviously that's a very relevant and also hard topic. It's very sensitively done and age appropriate. So it has a good story. There's a development of feelings. It has a resolution that's realistic and that's helpful. So Saya, the core of the book is that Saya is listening to her mom's voice on the answering machine because she doesn't have her mom with her, and it helps her feel closer to her mother. And then her mother begins sending her audio tapes of herself telling Saya bedtime stories. And then Saya decides to write a story of her own about her mother, and she sends it to the judge who's hearing her mother's case. And there's a resolution at the end that is a very nice ending. So that deals with issues about immigration, detention, family relationships, and does it in such a beautiful, sensitive, and age-appropriate way. And the final book this is a chapter book called Amina's Voice for 8 to 12-year-olds. It's pretty new. I think it was written last year, if I remember right. Amina is a Pakistani American girl who's Muslim. She's in middle school. And there's kind of two elements of the book. One element is that she's a typical middle school student who is thinking a lot about and struggling with homework and friendships and crushes and clubs. And so there's that aspect, and all young people could relate to that. But then something else happens and she's devastated, and her family's devastated when a local mosque in her town is vandalized. And the book addresses how the community comes together around helping in a lot of different ways. And one thing I really like about the book is it deals with issues of bias and injustice, but it also deals with, middle school life and culture, a lot about her culture as Pakistani, about her religion, and about culture. So it has both of those elements. It's not just about the hard, terrible thing, but it's also about, her full life. And again, that's for middle grades, so 8 to 12-year-olds.
Great. Thank you so much, Jinnie. So now I'm going to take you all through my text selections from Lee and Low. So the first one is a bilingual title, From North to South, Del Norte al Sur. And this is great for grades pre-K to 2. You can even use it for older children. So Jose loves helping Mama, who you see on the cover, in the garden outside their home in California. However, Mama is sent back to Mexico for not having proper papers, and Jose and his papa face an uncertain future. He wonders, what will it like to visit Mama in Tijuana, and when will she be able to come home? This book is incredibly timely, especially in tackling what's happening with family separation at the border. And again, I said this is great for grades pre-K to 2 and even children who are older. The second title is A House by the River, and this deals with natural disasters and storms. And here on the East Coast, we're in the middle of hurricane season, so this is timely in another sort of way. As the worst storm in years approaches, Belinda, who you see on the cover, wishes more than ever that she and her mother lived in town, where the houses are on high ground and safe from the rising river. Their old house, with its leaky roof and rickety stairs, does not seem strong enough to endure the fierce winds and driving rain that's approaching. But what Belinda discovers throughout the course of the book is that, and through the night of the storm, is that her house is made of more than wood and brick. It's also fortified by her family, and specifically her mother's love. So that's a great book to talk about storms or natural disasters. And then lastly, I Am Alfonso Jones is for children in grades 6 and above, and even in high school. And it's the first graphic novel for young readers to focus on police brutality and the Black Lives Matter movement. So Alfonso Jones can't wait to play the role of Hamlet in his school's hip-hop rendition of the classic Shakespearean play. He also wants to let his best friend know how he really feels about her, and so he goes to buy his first suit, and an off-duty police officer mistakes a clothes hanger for a gun in the department store, and he shoots Alfonso. And Alfonso wakes up in the afterlife, and he's on a ghost train guided by well-known victims of police shootings, and they teach him about what he needs to know about this subterranean spiritual world. And while that's happening, The graphic novel also shows, the illustrations show Alfonso's family and his friends struggling with their grief and seeking justice for Alfonso. So as they're confronting this new reality, Alfonso and those that he loved realize that the work really does lie ahead for the fight for justice. So this is an incredibly powerful graphic novel, again, for grades 6 and up. Okay. Okay. Sorry, everyone. I'm getting back into the PowerPoint. And Jinnie is going to talk about the breaking news. Hold on one second, Jinnie. Okay. I'm getting there. Sorry, everyone.
No problem.
Okay, here we go. We're back.
So the breaking news, which I mentioned before, is a wonderful book, and you can see in some of these images that the parents are watching the news and looking distressed, and if you can really see that the kids are noticing what's happening. And the girl who narrates it, she actually doesn't have a name in the book. She says, "Suddenly mom is glued to the television. Dad can't stop checking his phone." This is just a glimpse into what the book is about, but it basically focuses on what they're noticing and what they're seeing, and that then the girl comes to the conclusion that she wants to help in a big way. But maybe she can start with one small act at a time, and that can build on each other. And so an activity idea, and just to let you know, all the books that I referenced, and I know this is true for Katie as well with Lee and Lowe, we have, as I mentioned, Books Matter, and the books that we highlight each month, of which Breaking News is one. We have a guide, and there's the URL here. We have a guide for teachers, which has activities and discussion questions and additional resources. And then we have a parent guide too, which kind of takes a different angle. So this activity is actually one of the 3 activities that you would get in the teaching guide. So the idea of this would be, as a follow-up to this book, is to talk with children about what is news? What does that actually mean? Where do we get news? Where does it come from? What is it about? And have students then each identify a news story that's of interest to them and they want to know more about. And it should be about anything. It doesn't have to be about, about hard issues or about, being in a detention center. It could be about sports. It could be about weather. It could be about refugees. It could be about dress codes, like whatever they're interested in. So you want to follow their interests. Then they will find news stories and read those stories that are age appropriate, that have reading levels. And we listed some here that I think are really good. Newsela has, some of you may be familiar, it has news stories every single day at 5 reading levels, and usually they start with 2nd or 3rd grade. Time for Kids is also good. There's also a resource called Smithsonian Tribune. But just to know, Common Sense Media has a website called The Best News Sources for Kids, and they have listings of all websites that they think are appropriate for children, and it gives the age level. Those 3 are ones that I use a lot. So following this, each child will identify the news story. They might read some of these online news sites to find out what they're interested in, because they might not know, and then discuss the news story at home with their family, their parents, find out what their parents and family members might know, share what they know, and then finally bring it back into class and do a presentation with the information that they have. And that could be a writing piece, it could be a poem, it could be a drawing. You could even have them make a video where they can act like they're the news reporter and they're reporting on the news story. If they're older, they could do a PowerPoint presentation. So, you know, you can just be creative with that. But then what happens is everyone's shared a news story, and then they've just been learning a lot about different pieces of news. So, and that's in the teaching guide.
Great. Thank you so much, Jinnie. Yes, thank you for the reminder. All of the books, as Jinnie mentioned, all of the books that I spoke about in this webinar also have free and complimentary teacher's guides on our website. If you search for the title of the book, you'll see the book page where you can learn more about the book, and you'll also see the link to the teacher's guide where it's a PDF and you can print and use however you'd like.
So finally, we're not going to go into a huge amount of depth on this question, but we know that when faced with bullying, bias, injustice, difficult issues that children are hearing about in the news, we don't want them to feel powerless, hopeless, despairing. We want to be able to provide examples of child-sized actions they can take in the face of things like this, or examples of when other people, maybe not children, actually did something about the injustice that they saw in the world. And so there are a variety of ways that can happen, acting as an ally when you see bias and bullying, helping people who are impacted, you know, the Mr. Rogers focus on the helpers. So how can we do something together? Can we, if there's a natural disaster, can we write letters? Can we send money? Can we have a bake sale? Like what is something we can do to feel like we're helping? And also get involved in advocacy and activism, which can include writing letters, educating others, learning more about the issue, going to a demonstration or rally, participating in social media. There's lots of examples in all of these books, and there are many others that have that are excellent pieces of children's literature that also can be really inspiring. You know, we see some extraordinary people like Malala, but we also know that just ordinary people do things every day to make a difference, and we want to convey both of those messages.
Thank you so much, Jinnie. Yeah, to that, just some adding on, the titles here, yes, they combine both, you know, people like Malala and also children who are doing manageable actions in their own communities. I just wanted to spotlight the two Lee and Low titles at the bottom. The Can Man and Destiny's Gift, they show, you know, advocacy and activism through the lens of a child. So in the Can Man, a young boy who you see on the cover, he decides to collect and redeem empty soft can drinks for money to raise to buy a skateboard, but then he ends up giving his money to a local homeless man after a couple of chance encounters changed everything in his perspective. Destiny's Gift, Destiny and the owner of the bookstore who you see on the cover, she helps the neighborhood bring awareness to the fact that the bookstore might close and working together to try and keep the store open. So like I said, these are manageable, doable actions that are child-sized, as Jinnie mentioned. So these are some books for your reference in whatever capacity.
So we just wanted to go over a few tips. These are not necessarily about specific books, but because many of these topics are tough or sensitive, we wanted to give you some thoughts about how to approach them. It used to be that people, especially with young children, would say the best advice is wait for them to bring up the topic. Don't bring it up themselves. If something happened, wait for them. But I think given the environment we're in right now, the 24-hour news cycle, overheard conversations, children being exposed to news through social media, even if they don't have their own, you know, accounts, they are holding iPads and phones and are seeing things and hearing things. So, you know, that's up to you as an educator, as a parent, as a family member, but I do think it's important to really think proactively. So number one, you want to prepare yourself. So you want to make sure that you're comfortable with the topic, that you know something about it. Again, you don't have to know everything. And also that you're emotionally prepared, because sometimes we're devastated ourselves by things that happen. Mm-hmm. And we want to be in a place where we could be calm and not overly emotional for children. We don't have to pretend that we don't care. In fact, we should care. but we want to get ourselves sort of emotionally prepared. We want to create an environment where they feel comfortable expressing their thoughts and their feelings, allow enough time and space for them to express how they feel, ask questions. It's important to not judge their questions. I know my daughter sometimes asks questions that I find strange, or I don't necessarily like them. And so it's important to not judge, not send that message, but hear more about their questions and answer as best as you can. And that goes into the next point about encouraging questions. If you kind of shut down a question or judging, they will stop asking them. So you want to treat all questions with respect and seriousness. Even if you're uncomfortable or don't know the answer, you can say you'll find out together. And if you don't take their questions seriously, they'll stop asking, and then communication just halts. Answer questions as clearly and honestly as you can. You don't have to give long answers or speak in platitudes. You want to keep it simple, and often children will keep asking until they get what they need, and then they'll stop. And for some children or some issues, that will be one question, and some it might be 10. And some it might be more. So they need the specific answers to their questions, but they also need just kind of general reassurance, continuity, and knowing that they can come to you and they can count on you. Young people often struggle to understand why. These are difficult questions to answer. The motivation of why something happened, like vandalizing a mosque. I mean, we can try to understand that and explain that to children, but it's very, very complicated and hard. So if you don't know the answer, it's unclear, it's better to say you don't know than to give a reason that's simplistic or inaccurate. You want to be alert for signs of distress in children. Sometimes in the moment of talking about something, you'll hear and feel their distress, but sometimes that can come later. So that can include withdrawal, lack of interest, acting out, or fear. So you just want to be aware of that. Fostering empathy is something that we really, as parents and educators and librarians and whoever works with children, we really have an opportunity to display empathy ourselves and encourage empathy. So depending on what happened, you always want to ask questions about the people who are targets or victims, asking how they might feel, how their family members might feel. You might also share your own feelings, like, I feel so badly about what happened. What can we do to help? It's really important to ask those kinds of questions. We don't have to ask the question of, how would you feel if you were in that situation? They might not know that, but we can get them to reflect on how people who are in that situation might feel about it. And finally, as we talked about so many times, focus on the helpers, focus on child's actions. It's always useful to highlight, who helped and who made a difference, and further thinking together about something you might want to do to take action. And that could be in the form of showing you care to the impacted people in a community, sending a card or a donation, or acting as an ally when you see bias and bullying, or getting involved in activism, as we talked about. You, as an adult role model, can reflect on your own experiences of helping and acting as an ally and getting involved in advocacy or activism. And that's something that you can do together as a family or in a school, in a classroom. So as we discussed earlier, there are lots of great children's books. We mentioned a few of them, but there are many more that focus on ways to help and to get involved in different forms of making a difference that are on a child level.
Thanks, Jinnie. Really helpful tips. Thank you so much. So now we are going to have a few minutes for question and answer. So feel free to write any questions that you have for us in the chat box, and we will do our best to answer. Okay, so the first question that I have is, and Jinnie, I think this question would be appropriate for what you've been talking about specifically. What if I get pushback from parents and families in discussing these topics in the classroom?
Yes, so I think it's important if you feel like some of these topics are fraught or difficult or challenging to be proactive. So if you're a classroom teacher or a librarian, you can send a letter home from you or from the principal. Definitely share what you're doing with your school administration. So be proactive about what you're doing and why. And also you can reflect in that communication that you're hearing from children, if you are, and often many teachers are, that you're hearing some of these topics come up. These conversations are coming up in the classroom or on the playground, and using children's literature was a way of addressing them in a sensitive way.
Great, thank you so much. So I have another question that we can, hold on one second. Why should I be using these books primarily about people of color if my school or classroom or library is predominantly white? So I think that especially here at Lee and Low, our mission is books about everyone, for everyone, and books that serve as mirrors and windows. So not only do children need to see themselves in texts, but they need to see children from other races, backgrounds, and cultures in books that they read in whatever capacity that they're in, whether they're in the library or in the classroom. Everything that we've talked about and all of the books that we've mentioned in this webinar cover such a range of themes and genres, and these are all important in developing children's social and emotional learning, and not only their academic learning, but their emotional and social capacities. Jinnie, do you want to add anything to that?
I think that's good. I agree.
Great. So lastly, where can I find more books that include these themes, and what specifically books about cultures and conflict or other themes like that? So first, for Lee and Low, our website and blog are incredible resources. If you're looking for a specific theme, we have a myriad of themes listed on our website. We have many collections, and our search bar is an incredible tool that you can search for whatever you need, and books will come up. And our blog.leeandlow.com, also has great articles that not only I write, but we have interviews with authors and illustrators, and lots of different activities that you can use when talking about culturally responsive teaching or other elements in the library or classroom.
I would add that, we also, there's many books in Books Matter, and you're going to get a link to that. That's our bibliography. Most really good books are books about conflict. So Amina's Voice, which I mentioned, is definitely about like a very diverse community. There's Muslim people, there's non-Muslim people, there's definitely a conflict. And there's many books on the website that have those kind of conflicts that you can find. So
great, thanks, Jinnie. And so here we have our photos and our emails. So please, if you have a question for one of us, do not hesitate in reaching out. We are here to answer any additional questions that you might have or resources that you're looking for. We are here for you. And we also want to thank you for taking the time to join us today. We all know that you have incredibly busy schedules, so we really, we're appreciative for your time in joining us. And that's it. So thank you so much, everyone. And again, be on the lookout for an email with the links to the webinar and also to the toolkits, and stay tuned. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.